Who's going to beat the two big boys?
I think Alcaraz definitely got room for improvement.
I think he was physically...
It was always going to collapse. Not might, not could, always. The one man who understood exactly why. The scans hadn't even come back, the brace hadn't yet appeared at the Laureus Awards, was Nadal. Weeks of public silence, then one interview. And what Nadal finally reveals about Alcaraz's entire clay season is what nobody in tennis wanted to say out loud. Everyone called it bad luck. It wasn't. Alcaraz's entire clay season didn't collapse because of a random injury. It collapsed because a schedule assumed a 22-year-old body was a machine. April 14th, Barcelona. One return shot, the wrist gives way. 3,000 ranking points, gone. The two-time defending Roland Garros champion watches from home, wearing a brace, while the French Open runs without him. A leading sports science expert told Tennis 365 this week that tendon sheath injuries turn catastrophic the moment you ignore the signals. Del Potro ignored them. 4 surgeries later, the lesson was permanent. Thiem went the same route.
Getting the data and understanding what are the best conditions for living life that he can have for himself.
Neither man won another major. Nadal finally reveals he called Carlos after Barcelona. He broke the exact same structure twice. He confirmed walking away from Paris was the only correct decision. The story isn't the injury, it's the pattern. Subscribe. This channel goes deeper than the headline ever will. And the pattern shows this collapse was written into the 2026 clay season long before Alcaraz walked onto that Barcelona court. It started with a decision that looked completely reasonable at the time. After losing to Sebastian Corda in Miami, Alcaraz took a short break, went home to Murcia, recharged, and came back to clay with a full schedule locked in. Monte Carlo, Barcelona, Madrid, Rome, Roland Garros, every single tournament. No skips, no rest windows built in. The thinking was straightforward. Sinner was breathing down his neck in the rankings. The #1 spot was genuinely on the line, and pulling out of anything felt like handing points to the Italian without a fight. So Alcaraz committed to the full swing. That commitment, on paper, looked like ambition. In reality, it was a loaded gun, pointed at exactly the kind of injury that just ended his season. Because here is the thing about Alcaraz, that the rankings and the Grand Slam count tend to obscure. He does not play tennis the way other top players play tennis. His game extracts more from his body per point than almost anyone in the modern era. The forehand grip he uses, a heavy semi-western, generates the top spin and pace that makes him so devastating on clay, but it places constant rotational stress on the ulnar side of the wrist with every single stroke, not occasionally, every stroke. Multiply that across a 5-set match, multiply it across 5 tournaments in 7 weeks. The wrist is not a joint built to absorb that load indefinitely without a break, and Alcaraz was not giving it one. Stephen Smith, the founder of Kitman Labs and one of the most respected sports science minds working in professional athletics today, explained exactly this to Tennis 365 just days ago. The tendon sheath, which is the structure confirmed to be inflamed in Alcaraz's right wrist, is essentially the protective sleeve surrounding the tendon itself. When that sheath becomes inflamed, the body is not sending a polite suggestion, it is sending a hard stop. Smith was direct about what happens when athletes in high-repetition sports ignore that signal. The inflammation compounds. The sheath loses its ability to protect the tendon underneath. At that point, you are no longer dealing with a manageable soft tissue issue. You are one bad session away from something that requires surgery, and surgery on a tennis wrist is where careers go to get complicated. Del Potro knew that complication intimately, so did Thiem. Neither of them chose it willingly, they simply waited too long to stop. Alcaraz did not wait too long. That is the one part of this story that does not fit the tragedy narrative. On April 14th in Barcelona, during a first-round match against Otto Virtanen that he won comfortably, something shifted in his wrist mid-return. He felt it. He called the trainer. He finished the match. The next morning, he withdrew from the tournament and told reporters the injury was more serious than anyone expected. That sentence, more serious than anyone expected, is worth sitting with for a moment because it is doing a lot of work. It is telling you that the signals were Already there before Barcelona, the wrist had been accumulating stress through Monte Carlo, through the travel, through practice sessions that never fully stopped because the schedule never fully allowed them to. Barcelona was not the origin of the injury. Barcelona was the moment the wrist decided the conversation was over. Within 48 hours, Alcaraz had withdrawn from the Madrid Open as well. His home tournament, the event he has described as one of the most emotionally significant on his calendar, the tournament he missed the previous year too, due to a different injury entirely. 2 consecutive years without playing Madrid. The crowd that turns up specifically to watch him, the city that treats him like a national institution, and he has now missed it back to back. The statement he posted was careful and measured, but the pain underneath it was not hard to read. He used the word home. He used the word hurts. Then a week later came the announcement that absorbed everything: no Rome, no Roland Garros, season over. 3,000 ranking points, gone. Not deferred, not recoverable before Wimbledon, gone. The 1,000 from Rome and the 2,000 from Roland Garros will drop off his record as the tournaments conclude, and Sinner will collect whatever points he earns at both events on top of a lead that was already growing. The Italian entered this clay season with almost nothing to defend because he missed its early stages last year during his doping case suspension. That asymmetry is brutal in a points system that rewards defending champions and punishes absence with no exceptions. Alcaraz built those 3,000 points through some of the most extraordinary tennis played on clay in the last decade. He is watching them disappear from a sofa in Murcia while his wrist heals. And this is precisely where Nadal's intervention becomes something more than a supportive phone call between 2 Spanish tennis players. Nadal is 39 years old. He retired in November 2024 after a Davis Cup quarterfinal loss to the Netherlands that ended with tears on the bench in Malaga. His career is complete, catalogued, and sealed. He has no stake in the ATP rankings, no rivalry to protect, no personal interest in how Alcaraz navigates the rest of 2026. When he speaks about this situation, he is speaking from a place of pure experience, and the experience he is drawing on is not general, it is specific. He broke the same wrist structure twice during his own playing career. The first time came in 2016 at Roland Garros, the tournament Nadal described at the time as the most important event of his life. He played 2 rounds on an anesthetic injection, numbing the wrist enough to function while the damage underneath continued building. After winning his second round match, he held a press conference the following morning and delivered one of the most quietly devastating sentences in tennis history. He said the wrist was not broken, but if he kept playing, it would be broken within days. Then he withdrew. He missed Wimbledon. He came back for the Rio Olympics and reached the US Open. The wrist, treated properly with rest and conservative management, held together. His career continued for 8 more years and produced 8 more Grand Slam titles. The second wrist incident came in 2019 and was less dramatic in its public presentation, but significant enough to cost him the Shanghai Masters and the Laver Cup final. By that point, Nadal had developed an understanding of what his wrist could and could not absorb, and he managed accordingly. The pattern across both incidents was identical. The moment the wrist communicated clearly enough, he stopped. He did not negotiate with it. He did not attempt to compress the recovery into a timeline that suited the tournament calendar. He let the structure heal on its own schedule and came back when it was ready. That is the private knowledge he carried into the phone call with Alcaraz. Not sympathy, not encouragement in the generic sense that any former champion might offer a younger player. Actual technical, experiential knowledge of what this specific injury does when you respect it versus what it does when you don't. Nadal told the public that the conversation stays between them and that boundary is worth respecting. But what he confirmed publicly is enough to understand the shape of what was said. He validated the decision completely. He called it correct. He said Alcaraz is no longer a rookie who needs to be protected from hard truths. He is an experienced professional who made an experienced professional's decision. That framing matters because a significant portion of the tennis world's reaction to the Roland Garros withdrawal was not supportive. The criticism, spoken quietly in some corners and loudly in others, was that Alcaraz gave up on Paris too soon, that a month between the Barcelona withdrawal and the start of Roland Garros was enough time to recover from a tendon sheath inflammation, that a two-time defending champion at the most prestigious clay court tournament in the world should have at least attempted to make it back. The argument had a surface logic to it. Tenosynovitis, which is the confirmed diagnosis, is not a tear, not a fracture, not a surgical situation in most cases. Rest and anti-inflammatory treatment typically resolve it within weeks. So why not try? Renee Stubbs answered that question with the kind of bluntness that only comes from someone who has watched this sport at close range for decades. She did not frame the decision as cowardice or caution. She framed it as the only rational reading of tennis history available to anyone paying attention. Del Potro did not lose his career to a single catastrophic moment. He lost it to a series of decisions made under the pressure of a calendar that does not pause for anyone, each one individually defensible, collectively devastating. The wrist that won the 2009 US Open and produced one of the greatest upsets in Grand Slam history ended up going under the knife 4 times. By the time Del Potro's body finally said enough, the version of him that might have genuinely challenged the Big Three was gone. Thiem's situation was structurally different, a posterior sheath detachment rather than a tendon issue, but the underlying lesson was the same. Rush a wrist in a sport that runs entirely through the wrist, and the wrist will find a way to make the decision for you on a timeline and in a manner you will not enjoy. Alcaraz is 22 years old. He has 7 Grand Slam titles. He completed the career Grand Slam in January by winning the Australian Open, becoming the youngest man in history to do so. He has already won Roland Garros twice, Wimbledon twice, the US Open twice, and the Australian Open once. He has won titles on every surface. He is not a clay specialist whose entire identity depends on the red dirt the way Nadal's once did. He is something rarer and in some ways more exposed, an all-court player whose game places enormous demands on his body regardless of the surface, because the intensity he brings to every match does not drop when the surface changes. That is the context in which his comment at the Laureus Awards, delivered while wearing the wrist brace that confirmed to anyone watching that the season was already over, landed so clearly. He said he did not want to rush. He said a career could be very long. He said missing what needed to be missed in order to recover properly was not something that frightened him. Those words from a 22-year-old who just walked away from a potential 3rd consecutive Roland Garros title reflected a maturity about the relationship between body and ambition that takes most athletes years longer to develop. Nadal developed it the hard way, through injury and absence and the slow education of a body pushed past reasonable limits across 2 decades. Alcaraz appears to have absorbed the lesson without needing to pay the full tuition. The Wimbledon question remains open. Alcaraz's team has set no return date. Pablo Andújar, the former Spanish player who spoke with Carlos directly in early May, confirmed that Alcaraz is taking it day by day with no deadlines imposed. The target, according to reporting from Spanish media, is Queen's Club, the grass court warm-up event that begins in mid-June, as the ideal return point if the wrist cooperates. Queens would give him match practice on grass before Wimbledon starts on June 29th. It is an optimistic timeline, but not an unreasonable one if the tendon sheath responds to conservative treatment the way Smith and other experts expect it to. The absence of a tear is the critical piece of good news here. A sheath inflammation, managed correctly, does not necessarily leave a structural mark. It can heal completely. The career ahead of Alcaraz, if this is handled with the same patience his team is currently demonstrating, does not need to carry this injury as a permanent complication, but the 2026 clay season is gone. Roland Garros will happen without the man who won it in 2024 and 2025. Sinner will walk into Paris as the overwhelming favorite, carrying a points lead, a current winning streak across 5 consecutive Masters 1,000 titles, and the psychological advantage of knowing the one player who had beaten him consistently on clay is watching from home. The French Open has lost its most compelling storyline before it began. The rematch of the 2025 final, 5 hours and 29 minutes, the longest in Roland Garros history, 3 championship points saved, a comeback from 2 sets down that produced one of the great matches the sport has ever seen, will not happen in 2026. That match will have to wait for another year, another surface, another moment. What Nadal finally revealed was not a secret, it was not a scandal, it was not the kind of expose that reframes a career or changes a legacy. It was something quieter and in some ways more significant. It was the confirmation from the only voice with the standing to deliver it that the decision Alcaraz made was not surrender. It was not an admission that the body had failed. It was a recognition, arrived at by a 22-year-old who has already won more Grand Slams than most players win in a full career, that the body's signals are not optional reading, they are the text. Everything else, the rankings, the points, the titles, the records, the history, all of it is annotation. Nadal spent 20 years learning that lesson in the most expensive way available. He built 14 Roland Garros titles on top of a body he pushed further than any reasonable calculation suggested was sustainable. And he was right to do it because he is Rafael Nadal, and the results justified the method. But the method left marks: the knees, the foot, the wrist, twice. The accumulated damage that turned his final years into a series of returns and withdrawals and press conferences about timelines and recovery windows. He would not take any of it back. He has said as much. The approach was his and the results were historic. But he also knows with a precision that only lived experience provides what the alternative looks like. And when he called Alcaraz after Barcelona, that knowledge was the thing he was offering. The pattern that this intro promised to lay out is not complicated once you see it clearly. A 22-year-old with a game built on rotational wrist stress committed to a full clay swing without recovery gaps, against a ranking rival who had nothing to defend and every reason to play everything. The wrist accumulated load across Monte Carlo and practice sessions and travel. Barcelona was the breaking point. The response, immediate withdrawal, conservative treatment, no deadlines, full rest, was the correct one. And the man who confirmed it was correct is the same man who once played Roland Garros on a numbed wrist because he could not bring himself to stop, who missed Wimbledon and came back stronger, and who now stands in a museum built to his own legacy, telling the next generation that stopping when the body says stop is not weakness. It is the decision that makes everything else possible. Alcaraz's entire clay season collapsed in 2026. The title said it, the story proved it, and Nadal finally explained why it was never going to go any other way. If this breakdown gave you something the highlights and the hot takes didn't, subscribe. This channel covers tennis the way it deserves to be covered, with context, with history, and without the noise. Hit the bell. The next one is already coming.